The stranger in the snow. The air was bitterly cold that Christmas Eve, biting through the thickest of jackets and layering every surface in a pristine coat of white. Snowflakes danced under the glow of streetlights, settling quietly on rooftops and empty streets. The glow of Christmas decorations adorned the small town of Brookhaven, but the cheer they exuded failed to penetrate the walls of the Harper family home. Inside, the Harpers were as fractured as the old photo frame hanging askew on their living room wall. The family had once been vibrant and full of life, but the loss of Amy Harper, mother, wife, and the heart of the household, 2 years prior had left a gaping hole. Her absence was like an unspoken shadow, lingering in every corner, stealing warmth and laughter. Oliver Harper, just 9 years old, sat cross-legged by the fireplace. The flames flickered, crackling softly, but their warmth felt hollow. Beside him, a half-decorated Christmas tree leaned slightly, its ornaments mismatched and sparse. In his hands, he clutched a piece of paper, a letter to Santa. He stared at the blank page, the words he wanted to write swirling in his mind, but refusing to form. "I don't want toys," he whispered to himself, his voice almost trembling. "I just want them to smile again." Upstairs, his older sister Lily, 15 and perpetually angry these days, sat with her headphones on, scrolling through her phone with a scowl. Their father, Ethan, was at the dining table, surrounded by bills and paperwork, a deep frown etched into his face. He rubbed his temples, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like the snow outside. "What's the point of Christmas?" Oliver mumbled as he folded the paper in half and set it aside. Suddenly, a faint knock at the door broke the quiet. It was soft but deliberate, carrying through the house like a whisper. Oliver perked up, his head tilting toward the sound. "Dad," he called. "Someone's at the door." "Ignore it," Ethan replied, not looking up from his papers. "It's probably just someone selling something." But the knock came again, this time a little firmer. "Dad, it might be important," Oliver insisted, already rising to his feet. He shuffled to the front door, his small hand reaching for the latch. "Oliver, wait." Ethan's voice came sharp and quick, but it was too late. The door creaked open, revealing a man bundled in a long, tattered coat. Snow clung to his shoulders and hat, and his face was flushed red from the cold. He clutched a small frayed bag in one hand, while the other was raised in a gesture of peace. "Sorry to bother you," the man said, his voice hoarse but kind. "The storm's worse than I thought, and I've been walking for miles. I was just hoping for a place to warm up for a bit. I won't be any trouble, I promise." Ethan appeared in the hallway, his expression hard and skeptical. He placed a firm hand on Oliver's shoulder, gently pulling him back. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his tone cautious. The man gave a weak smile. "Name's Jonah. I don't mean to intrude. Just needed a break from the cold." Ethan hesitated, his protective instincts clashing with the remnants of his wife's voice in his head, the voice that had always urged him to help others. But the world felt different now, harder and more dangerous. He glanced outside at the swirling snow, then back at the man whose lips trembled from the freezing air. "Dad, he's cold," Oliver said, tugging on his father's sleeve. "Please." Ethan sighed heavily. "You can come in, but only for a little while. The storm should ease up soon." "Thank you," Jonah replied with evident relief. He stepped inside, careful to wipe his boots on the mat, though his worn soles left faint damp prints on the floor. Oliver ran to grab a blanket while Jonah settled into the old armchair by the fireplace. He held his hands out to the flames, the warmth visibly relaxing his tense shoulders. "How long have you been out there?" Ethan asked, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Jonah shrugged. "A while. Just trying to get somewhere. Don't have much of a plan these days." Ethan frowned but didn't press further. He was about to speak when Lily appeared at the bottom of the stairs. "Who's this?" she asked, her tone sharp as she eyed Jonah suspiciously. "Someone who needed to get out of the cold," Ethan replied shortly. Great, Lily muttered. We're just letting random strangers into the house now. That's enough, Lily, Ethan said firmly. Go back upstairs. Whatever, she snapped, retreating with an exaggerated groan. Jonah watched her go, then glanced at Ethan. Teenagers, huh? Ethan gave a weary nod but didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Oliver, who was now offering Jonah a mug of cocoa he prepared in the kitchen. Here, Oliver said with a shy smile. It'll warm you up. Jonah accepted the mug with both hands, his weathered face softening. Thank you, kid. That's real kind of you. As the evening wore on, the storm outside intensified. The wind howled like a distant wolf, and snow piled high against the windows. Jonah glanced out, his expression unreadable. You'll have to stay the night, Ethan said reluctantly. The roads will be impassable by now. Jonah nodded, setting the empty cocoa mug down on the table. I appreciate it. I'll take the couch. Don't want to put you out more than I already have. You'd better not, Ethan said, though there was no malice in his tone. He stood, his eyes lingering on Jonah for a moment before adding, I'll grab some pillows. As Ethan disappeared down the hallway, Jonah turned to Oliver, who was busy adjusting the ornaments on the tree again. Your tree's looking good, Jonah said, his voice soft. Oliver looked up, smiling faintly. It's not as nice as it used to be. Mom always made it look perfect. Jonah's face shifted, a shadow of something painful passing over his features. It's not about perfect, he said gently. It's about what it means to you. Oliver tilted his head, thinking for a moment. Do you have a family? Jonah hesitated, his gaze drifting to the fire. I used to. Before Oliver could ask more, Ethan returned with blankets and a pillow. Jonah thanked him quietly and settled on the couch. As the family retreated to their rooms, the house grew quiet, except for the soft crackle of the fire and the muffled wail of the wind outside. Jonah stared at the ceiling, the warmth of the room doing little to ease the chill in his heart. Yet for the first time in what felt like years, he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this night would change more than just his circumstances. A house divided. The morning arrived with a pale winter sun struggling to break through the heavy clouds. Snow blanketed the streets, piled high on fences and cars, transforming the neighborhood into a postcard-perfect winter wonderland. Inside the Harper home, however, tensions brewed like a storm. Jonah was awake early, his belongings neatly packed back into his tattered bag. He sat on the couch, staring at the fireplace, where the embers from the previous night's fire still glowed faintly. Despite the warmth, he couldn't shake the chill that had settled deep in his bones, a reminder of how far he had fallen and how far he still had to go. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Ethan stood at the counter, pouring himself a steaming cup. His face was lined with exhaustion, his thoughts heavy. He turned when he heard soft footsteps and found Jonah standing in the doorway, his bag slung over one shoulder. Good morning, Jonah said, his voice gravelly but polite. Morning, Ethan replied. He gestured toward the pot. Coffee? Jonah hesitated, then nodded. If you're offering. Ethan poured a second cup and handed it to Jonah, who cradled it in his hands like it was a lifeline. They stood in silence for a moment, the quiet only broken by the occasional hiss of the heater kicking on. You don't have to rush out, Ethan said finally, his voice reluctant. The roads are still bad. Jonah took a sip of his coffee, savoring the warmth. I've imposed enough already. You've been kind. That's more than most people would do. Ethan glanced toward the living room, where Oliver was curled up on the couch, still asleep, a blanket pulled up to his chin. It was my son's idea to let you in. He's got a big heart. Jonah smiled faintly. Takes after his mom, I bet. Ethan stiffened, his grip tightening around his coffee mug. Maybe, he said shortly. Before Jonah could respond, the sound of a door slamming upstairs broke the quiet. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, her expression sour. Is he still here? she asked, her tone loud enough to wake Oliver, who sat up groggily. Lily, Ethan said, a warning in his voice. What? She snapped. We don't even know this guy, and you're letting him stay in our house like it's some kind of hotel. Lily, enough, Ethan barked, setting his mug down with a sharp clink. Jonah raised a hand, his voice calm. It's fine. She's not wrong to be cautious. I'm not being cautious, Lily shot back, descending the stairs. I'm being realistic. You don't know him, Dad. For all we know, he could be some kind of criminal. Oliver, now fully awake, jumped to Jonah's defense. He's not a criminal. He's nice. He helped me with the Christmas tree. Lily rolled her eyes. Oh well, if he helped with the tree, he must be harmless. That's enough, Lily, Ethan said, his tone sharp. Jonah set his coffee down on the counter. I don't want to cause trouble. Maybe it's best if I go. No, Oliver cried, scrambling off the couch. You can't leave. You don't have anywhere to go. Lily, Ethan said, his voice firm. Apologize. Why should I? She snapped, crossing her arms. He's just going to leave anyway, like everyone else. The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Ethan's face fell, his anger giving way to something deeper, guilt, perhaps, or regret. Jonah's eyes flicked between father and daughter, his expression unreadable. Lily, Ethan said softly, that's not fair. Fair, Lily said, her voice trembling now. You want to talk about fair. Mom's gone, and you don't even care. You just bury yourself in work and leave us to figure everything out. That's not true, Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Yes, it is, Lily shouted, tears welling in her eyes. You don't care about Christmas or this family or anything anymore. You're just empty. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He looked away, his jaw tightening as he struggled to keep his emotions in check. Jonah cleared his throat, drawing their attention. Maybe, he said gently, this isn't really about me. Lily turned to him, her eyes narrowing. What would you know about it? Jonah met her gaze steadily. More than you might think. Lily scoffed and stormed out of the room, slamming the front door behind her. The sound echoed through the house, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Ethan ran a hand over his face, his shoulders slumping. I'm sorry, he said to Jonah. She's going through a lot. Jonah nodded, his expression thoughtful. So are you. Ethan looked up, surprised. What? You're all grieving, Jonah said simply. In your own ways, but you're not doing it together. That's what she's angry about. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. He stared down at his coffee, his brow furrowed. Jonah stood, slinging his bag over his shoulder. I should go. Oliver rushed forward, grabbing Jonah's arm. No, you can't leave. You're the only one who understands. Oliver, Ethan said softly, let him go. But Dad. Oliver, Ethan repeated, his voice firm. It's not up to us. Jonah crouched down so he was eye level with Oliver. Hey kid, he said gently. It's okay. You're a good kid, and your family's lucky to have you. Just don't give up on them, okay? Tears welled in Oliver's eyes, but he nodded. Jonah ruffled the boy's hair, then stood and turned to Ethan. Thanks for the coffee. And the couch. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. Take care. Jonah pulled his coat tighter around him and stepped out into the snow. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and the house felt even emptier than before. Outside, the snow was still thick, the air sharp and biting. Jonah trudged down the street, his footsteps crunching in the fresh powder. He glanced back at the Harper house, the glow of the Christmas lights faint through the frost-covered windows. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, with a sigh, he turned and kept walking. Behind him, inside the house, Oliver stood by the window, watching Jonah disappear into the snow. He pressed his hand against the glass, a single tear rolling down his cheek. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you think he'll be okay?" Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the front door, Jonah's words echoing in his mind. "You're not doing it together." Somewhere deep inside him, something stirred, a flicker of recognition, or maybe regret. He didn't know what to do with it. Not yet. But he knew one thing. He couldn't let things stay the same. Not anymore. The ripple effect. The snow had stopped by midday, leaving the streets cloaked in a pristine, shimmering white. Inside the Harper home, a tense quiet lingered. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring at the crumpled papers in front of him, his mind a tangle of guilt and frustration. Upstairs, Lily remained locked in her room, her music blaring faintly through the door. Oliver, the youngest and most tender-hearted of the family, sat cross-legged by the window, gazing out at the expanse of snow-covered streets, hoping for a glimpse of Jonah. He didn't understand why Jonah had to leave. For the first time in a long time, it felt like someone truly listened, someone who didn't brush him off or treat him like a naive kid. Jonah wasn't just a stranger to Oliver. He had become something more than just one night. A bridge. A small thread connecting a family that felt irreparably broken. "Dad," Oliver said softly, turning from the window. "Do you think Jonah's okay? It's still so cold out there." Ethan, lost in thought, didn't respond right away. His eyes were fixed on the coffee cup in front of him, his thumb tracing the rim absently. Oliver spoke again, louder this time. "Dad?" Ethan blinked, jolted from his thoughts. "What is it, Oliver?" "Do you think Jonah's okay?" the boy repeated, his brow furrowed with worry. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Bud." He seemed like he could handle himself. But he didn't have anywhere to go, Oliver pressed. What if something happens to him? Ethan hesitated, guilt pricking at him. Jonah's an adult. He's been through a lot, I'm sure, but he'll figure it out. That's what people like him do. Oliver frowned. People like him. You know, Ethan said, shrugging. People who live on the streets. They're tough. They know how to survive. That's not fair, Oliver said, his voice trembling with emotion. You don't even know him, Dad. He's not just some homeless guy. He's Jonah. He helped me with the tree. He cared. Ethan opened his mouth to respond but found himself at a loss. The conviction in Oliver's voice hit him harder than he'd expected. The boy had a way of cutting straight through the noise, revealing truths Ethan had been avoiding. Meanwhile, upstairs, Lily lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her music played softly now, the lyrics echoing her inner turmoil. She hated the way she felt. Angry, lost, and untethered. Every time she thought about her mother, it was like reopening a wound that refused to heal. And then there was her father. His absence wasn't physical, but it might as well have been. He was there, but he wasn't really there, not in the ways that mattered. A knock at her door startled her. She frowned, sitting up. What? It's me. Oliver's small voice called through the door. Lily rolled her eyes. What do you want? There was a pause. Can I come in? She sighed, standing to unlock the door. Oliver stepped inside, clutching the letter he'd written to Santa. She glanced at the paper, then back at him, her brow furrowing. What's that? It's my letter, Oliver said, his voice small. To Santa. Lily raised an eyebrow. You still believe in Santa? Oliver hesitated, then shrugged. Not really. But I didn't know who else to write to. Her expression softened slightly, but she masked it with a sarcastic tone. So what are you asking for? A new bike? A game console? Oliver shook his head and handed her the letter. Lily unfolded it and read the words. As she did, her sarcasm melted away, replaced by a pang of guilt and sadness. Dear Santa, I don't need any toys this year. I just want my family to be happy again. That's all I want for Christmas. Lily stared at the letter, her throat tightening. She looked at Oliver, who stood there, his big, hopeful eyes watching her carefully. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't have to say anything, Oliver said. I thought you should know. Lily nodded, folding the letter back up and handing it to him. You're a weird kid, you know that. Oliver smiled faintly. You always say that. Lily hesitated, then knelt down so she was at his level. You know, you're braver than me. I don't think I could have written something like that. Oliver frowned. Why not? Because, she struggled to find the words. Because I don't think I believe it can happen. Oliver's face fell. You don't think we can be happy again? Lily looked away, guilt flooding her. I don't know, Ollie. It just feels like everything's too broken. Downstairs, Ethan stood by the living room window, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He watched the snow-covered street, replaying Jonah's words in his mind. You're not doing it together. It was true. He'd been trying to hold everything together on his own, but in doing so, he pushed his kids further away. He thought he was protecting them, but he was really just avoiding the pain, his own and theirs. Ethan's gaze shifted to the Christmas tree. It leaned slightly, its ornaments a haphazard mix of old and new. It wasn't the tree Amy would have decorated. She had always been meticulous, arranging every ornament with care. But it wasn't Amy's tree anymore. It was theirs, and it was time he started treating it that way. That evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep indigo, Ethan called the kids into the living room. Lily appeared reluctantly, her arms crossed, while Oliver bounded in eagerly. What's going on? Lily asked, her tone wary. Ethan gestured toward the tree. I thought we could finish decorating. Together. Lily blinked, surprised. You want to decorate the tree? You? Yeah, Ethan said, his voice steady. I know I've been distant, and I'm sorry for that. But I want to change. I want to start trying again. For both of you. Lily hesitated, her defenses wavering. Why now? Because, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. I can't keep pretending that I'm the only one who lost her. We all did, and we've all been trying to handle it on our own. But that's not what she would have wanted. She would have wanted us to lean on each other, to be a family. Oliver looked at Lily, his eyes wide with hope. Please, Lily. She sighed, glancing at the tree, then at her father. Fine, she muttered, but only because it looks terrible, and it's driving me crazy. Ethan smiled faintly. I'll take it. As they began unpacking the remaining ornaments, something shifted in the room. The tension eased, replaced by a tentative sense of connection. They weren't healed, not yet, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like they were moving in the right direction. As Oliver placed the last ornament on the tree, he stepped back, admiring their work. It's perfect, he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Lily rolled her eyes but smiled. It's crooked. It's ours, Ethan said softly, his gaze lingering on the tree. That's what matters. For the first time in years, the Harper home felt a little warmer. And somewhere out in the snow-covered streets, Jonah smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. The missing link. The evening stretched on, its silence broken only by the faint crackling of the fireplace. The Harper family sat together for the first time in what felt like forever. The Christmas tree, though crooked and mismatched, shimmered with a fragile beauty, its glow casting a soft warmth over the room. Oliver had fallen asleep on the couch, his small frame curled under a blanket. Lily, arms crossed, sat in the armchair by the fire, occasionally glancing at her father, who was staring into the flames with a pensive expression. The piece felt fragile, like glass, and Lily couldn't help but feel the weight of unspoken words pressing down on her chest. You're not good at this, you know, Lily said suddenly, breaking the silence. Ethan blinked, startled by her voice. At what? At trying. she said, her tone laced with sarcasm, but tinged with something softer. You think one night of decorating the tree makes everything okay? Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. No, I don't. I know it doesn't. Then why are you doing it? She pressed, her voice sharper now. Why pretend you care when you've been ignoring us for 2 years? He looked at her, his expression weary but resolute. Because I do care, Lily. I always have. I just didn't know how to show it. Lily scoffed, leaning back in her chair. That's a convenient excuse. It's not an excuse, Ethan said, his voice firmer now. It's the truth. When your mom died, I didn't just lose my wife. I lost my compass. She was the one who kept this family together. And when she was gone, I didn't know how to fill that void. Lily's eyes narrowed, her defenses rising. So what? You gave up on us? On yourself? No, Ethan said softly. I didn't give up. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I kept everything running smoothly, you'd have what you needed. I didn't realize what you needed most was me. Lily's throat tightened, but she refused to let him see the tears threatening to spill. It's a little late for that, don't you think? It's never too late, Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with regret. I know I can't undo the past, Lily, but I can try to do better. Starting now. She looked away, staring at the fire as the flames danced and flickered. The anger she carried was heavy, and part of her wanted to hold on to it. But another part, a smaller, quieter part, wanted to believe him. Upstairs, Oliver stirred awake, his dreams interrupted by a faint sound. He sat up, rubbing his eyes and listening intently. At first, he thought it was the wind, but then he heard it again, a soft tapping at the window. Heart pounding, he slid off the couch and tiptoed to the front door. The tapping continued, more insistent now. He peeked through the peephole but saw nothing except the snow-covered porch. Curiosity getting the better of him, he unlocked the door and pulled it open. There, standing on the doorstep, was Jonah. Jonah, Oliver whispered, his voice a mix of surprise and relief. Hey, kid, Jonah said, his breath visible in the freezing air. Didn't mean to wake you. I just forgot something. Oliver tilted his head, confused. What did you forget? Jonah hesitated, glancing past Oliver into the house. His expression was guarded but warm. I'll explain. But first, let's get out of this cold. Oliver stepped aside, letting Jonah in. The man stamped the snow off his boots and rubbed his gloved hands together, trying to shake off the chill. His eyes scanned the room, landing on the glowing tree and the faintly flickering fire. Nice work on the tree, Jonah said with a small smile. Looks like you finished it. Oliver beamed. Yeah, we did it together. Me, Lily, and Dad. It was nice. Jonah nodded, his smile fading slightly as his gaze grew distant. Family's important, he said softly, more to himself than to Oliver. Why did you come back? Oliver asked, his brow furrowed with curiosity. Jonah crouched down so he was at eye level with the boy. Because I left something behind, he said, his voice gentle. And I think it might help. What is it? Instead of answering, Jonah reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small worn object wrapped in cloth. He carefully unwrapped it, revealing a delicate wooden ornament shaped like a heart. It was intricately carved, the edges smoothed by time, and in the center were 2 initials, J and M. It's beautiful, Oliver said, his eyes wide. Did you make it? Jonah nodded, his expression bittersweet. A long time ago. For someone I loved very much. Oliver's gaze flicked between Jonah and the ornament. Why are you giving it to us? Because, Jonah said, his voice trembling slightly. Sometimes, holding on to something too tightly can stop you from moving forward. And I think it's time this went to someone who needs it more than I do. Oliver stared at the ornament, his small hands reaching out to take it. He held it carefully, as though it might break under his touch. "Thank you," he said softly. "I'll take good care of it." "I know you will," Jonah said with a faint smile. Ethan and Lily appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of voices. Their eyes widened in surprise when they saw Jonah standing by the tree. "Jonah," Ethan said, his tone a mix of shock and confusion. "What are you doing here?" Jonah straightened, slipping his hands into his pockets. "I realized I had something to give you, something I think might help." Ethan frowned, his gaze flicking to the ornament in Oliver's hands. "What is that?" "It's a reminder," Jonah said carefully, "of the things that matter most." Lily stepped closer, her arms uncrossing as she stared at the ornament. "Did you make that?" Jonah nodded. "For my wife. She passed away a few years ago. I thought holding on to it would keep her close, but sometimes letting go is the only way to heal." Ethan's expression softened, and he looked down at Oliver, who was still clutching the ornament tightly. "Why us?" Lily asked, her voice quieter now. Jonah hesitated, then said, "Because I see a family that's been through a lot, a family that's trying, and I think you'll take good care of it." Ethan stepped forward, his eyes meeting Jonah's. "Thank you for everything." Jonah smiled faintly, his gaze lingering on the tree. "Take care of each other. That's all that matters." As Jonah turned to leave, Oliver ran to him, throwing his arms around the man's waist. "Don't go," the boy pleaded. "Stay for Christmas." Jonah hesitated, his hand resting gently on Oliver's head. "Christmas isn't about where you are, kid. It's about who you carry with you." With that, he stepped out into the snow, his figure disappearing into the night. Inside, the Harper family stood in silence, the weight of Jonah's words settling over them like a warm blanket. As they hung the ornament on the tree, it seemed to glow brighter than the others, its delicate shape a symbol of love, loss, and the unyielding strength of family. And for the first time in years, the Harpers felt a flicker of something they thought they'd lost. Hope, the gift of the heart. The house felt different after Jonah left. His presence, though brief, had stirred something in each member of the Harper family, something they couldn't quite put into words. The wooden heart ornament, now hanging from the highest branch of the tree, seemed to shine more brightly than any of the other decorations. Its soft glow cast a warm light that filled the room, pulling the family together in a way that felt new. Lily sat on the couch, staring at the ornament. She twirled a strand of hair around her finger, her thoughts spinning like the snowflakes outside. For the first time in a long time, she felt the weight of her anger begin to lift, replaced by a flicker of curiosity. "What do you think he meant?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Ethan looked up from his seat near the fire. "Meant by what?" "By giving us the ornament," Lily said, her gaze fixed on the wooden heart. "It's like he was trying to tell us something." Oliver, curled up beside her, looked up with wide eyes. "I think he wanted us to remember that love is the most important thing." Lily frowned slightly, her teenage skepticism kicking in. "Yeah, but why give it to us? He didn't even know us." "Maybe that's why," Ethan said, his voice thoughtful. "Sometimes it's easier for someone on the outside to see what we can't." Lily raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Like how we've been holding on to our pain instead of leaning on each other. How we've been pushing each other away instead of pulling together." Lily looked away, her expression conflicted. She hated admitting when her dad was right, but deep down she knew he was. She had been holding on to her anger like a shield, using it to protect herself from the grief that threatened to consume her. "I don't know how to stop being angry," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's heart ached at her vulnerability. He stood and moved to sit beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "It's okay to be angry, Lily. It's okay to feel everything you're feeling. But don't let it shut you off from the people who love you." Lily blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. It's not fair. She's gone, And we're all just supposed to move on like it doesn't hurt. No, Ethan said, his voice steady. We're supposed to carry her with us. In our hearts, in the way we love each other. That's what she would have wanted. Oliver, sensing the emotion in the room, scooted closer to his sister. I miss her too, Lily, he said softly. Every day. Lily looked down at him, her tough exterior cracking as she pulled him into a hug. Me too, Ollie. Me too. As the evening wore on, the family found themselves drawn to the living room. Ethan made hot cocoa, complete with marshmallows, and they sat together near the tree. The tension that had defined their days for so long seemed to melt away, replaced by a tentative sense of connection. Ethan cleared his throat, breaking the comfortable silence. There's something I want to show you both. Oliver and Lily exchanged curious glances as Ethan stood and walked to the bookshelf. He pulled down a small, dusty photo album and brought it to the coffee table. This, he said, opening the album to the first page, was the first Christmas your mom and I spent together after we got married. The photo showed a young Ethan and Amy sitting in front of a tiny, sparsely decorated tree. Their smiles were wide and full of joy, their love practically radiating from the page. Mom looked so happy, Oliver said, leaning closer. She was, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. She loved Christmas more than anyone I've ever known. She said it wasn't about the presents or the decorations. It was about the feeling, the magic of being together. Lily traced her finger over the edge of the photo. Why didn't you ever show us these before? Ethan hesitated, guilt flickering across his face. I thought, looking at them would make things harder. I thought it would hurt too much. But it doesn't, Oliver said, his voice filled with wonder. It makes me feel like she's still here. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. Me too, buddy. Lily flipped through the album slowly, her eyes lingering on each photo. One in particular caught her attention. A picture of Amy holding a small wooden ornament shaped like a heart. She gasped softly. That's the same ornament Jonah gave us, she said, her voice trembling. How did he have it? Ethan's brow furrowed as he leaned in to look. It can't be the same one. Your mom made that years ago. But it looks exactly the same, Lily insisted, her heart racing. What if it is the same one? What if Jonah knew Mom? The idea hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Ethan shook his head, struggling to make sense of it. That doesn't make any sense. Jonah didn't say anything about knowing her. But what if he didn't want to say? Oliver said, his voice rising with excitement. What if he came here because he knew we needed help? Ethan sat back, his mind spinning. The coincidence was too uncanny to ignore, but the logical part of him resisted the idea. Still, a small part of him, a part he hadn't listened to in a long time, wondered if there was more to Jonah's visit than met the eye. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Ethan sat alone in the living room, staring at the tree. The wooden heart ornament seemed to glow brighter in the dim light, as though it held a secret waiting to be uncovered. He thought about Jonah's words, about the quiet wisdom in his eyes. There had been something familiar about him, something Ethan couldn't quite place. And then there was the ornament, a piece of Amy's past that had somehow found its way back to them. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Amy, he whispered, his voice breaking. If you can hear me, thank you. For sending him. For reminding me what matters. The fire crackled softly, and for a brief moment, Ethan felt a warmth that went beyond the flames. It was as though Amy's presence filled the room, wrapping around him like a comforting embrace. He looked at the tree, the photo album open on the table, and the two closed doors upstairs where his children slept. For the first time in 2 years, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Miles away, Jonah sat on a park bench, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The stars twinkled above, their light reflecting off the snow. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a photo, a picture of Amy, smiling brightly as she held the wooden heart ornament he had carved for her so many years ago. "You'd be proud of them," he said softly, his breath visible in the cold air. "They're stronger than they know, just like you." As he tucked the photo back into his pocket, he smiled, a sense of peace washing over him. Jonah had done what he came to do, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The light within. Christmas morning arrived with the sun breaking through the heavy gray clouds for the first time in days. Golden light spilled across the snow-covered streets, illuminating the world in a way that felt almost magical. Inside the Harper home, the air was filled with a quiet anticipation that hadn't been there in years. Ethan woke up earlier than usual, a strange sense of calm settling over him. He hadn't slept much, his mind racing with thoughts of Jonah and the wooden heart ornament. He stepped into the living room, the soft glow of the Christmas tree greeting him like an old friend. For a moment, he simply stood there, taking it all in. The house was silent, but it didn't feel empty. It felt alive. As he turned toward the kitchen, Ethan's eyes caught on the photo album still sitting on the coffee table. He picked it up, flipping through the pages slowly. Memories of Amy flooded back. Her laugh, her gentle touch, the way she used to hum Christmas songs while baking cookies with the kids. He paused on a photo of her holding the wooden heart ornament, her smile radiant. He touched the image gently, his throat tightening. "You knew, didn't you?" he whispered. "You knew we needed him." Upstairs, Oliver stirred awake, the faint sound of bells drifting through the air. At first, he thought it was part of a dream, but as he sat up, he realized it was real. Throwing off his blanket, he hurried to the window and peered outside. There on the snowy street stood a familiar figure, Jonah. "Dad, Dad," Oliver called, running down the stairs. Ethan, startled, looked up just in time to see his son throw open the front door and rush outside. "Oliver, wait," Ethan called, but the boy was already halfway down the driveway. Jonah stood at the edge of the street, his coat dusted with snow, a faint smile playing on his lips. He held a small box in his hands, wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with twine. "You came back," Oliver said, his breath visible in the cold air. "I knew you would." "I couldn't stay away," Jonah said, crouching to meet Oliver's eyes. "Not without making sure you got this." He handed the boy the box. It was light, almost weightless, but Oliver held it like it was the most precious thing in the world. "What is it?" "Something your mom would have wanted you to have," Jonah said softly. Ethan, now standing on the porch, watched the exchange with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. He stepped forward, his voice steady but cautious. "Jonah, what is this?" Jonah stood, his gaze meeting Ethan's. "Something that belongs to your family." Ethan frowned, but nodded, gesturing for Jonah to come inside. The three of them returned to the warmth of the house, where Lily stood at the top of the stairs, her expression a mix of surprise and wariness. "What's going on?" she asked, descending slowly. "Jonah's back," Oliver said, holding up the box. "And he brought us something." Lily's eyes flicked to Jonah, then to the box. "What is it?" "Open it," Jonah said, his voice calm. Oliver placed the box on the coffee table and carefully untied the twine. Inside was a single photograph, its edges worn but the image clear. It showed a young Jonah standing beside Amy, their smiles wide and full of life. They were holding the wooden heart ornament together. Ethan stared at the photo, his breath catching in his throat. You knew her." Jonah nodded, his expression bittersweet. "A long time ago. Amy and I grew up together. She was my best friend. We lost touch after college, but I never forgot her." Lily leaned closer, her eyes wide. "You made the ornament for her." "I did," Jonah said. "It was a Christmas gift. She said it reminded her of the kind of love she wanted to share with her family one day. And from what I can see, she did." Ethan sank onto the couch, his mind reeling. "Why didn't you tell us before?" "Because this wasn't about me," Jonah said. "It was about you." about remembering what she gave you and carrying that forward. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes as he looked at the photograph, then at the ornament on the tree. "She always believed in the magic of Christmas," he said, his voice trembling. "Even when things were hard, she never stopped believing." Jonah smiled faintly. "That's who she was, and she'd want you to find that magic again." Lily, her tough exterior finally crumbling, sat down beside her father. "I think she sent him," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "To remind us." Ethan nodded, pulling both his children into a hug. "She always had a way of knowing what we needed, even when we didn't." The rest of the morning was filled with a warmth and joy the Harper family hadn't felt in years. They laughed, shared stories about Amy, and even sang Christmas carols by the fire. Jonah stayed for breakfast, his presence a quiet reminder of the strength that comes from connection. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Jonah stood to leave. Oliver clung to his hand, his eyes pleading. "Do you have to go?" "I do," Jonah said gently. "But I'll always be with you. In here." He tapped the boy's chest. Ethan stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "Thank you, Jonah, for everything." Jonah shook his hand firmly. "Take care of them, Ethan, and yourself." With that, Jonah stepped out into the snow, his figure fading into the distance. The Harpers stood on the porch, watching until he disappeared. That night, as the house grew quiet and the world outside sparkled with frost, Ethan sat by the tree, the photo of Amy and Jonah in his hands. He placed it beside the wooden heart ornament, a symbol of the love and resilience that had carried them through. For the first time in a long time, he felt her presence, not as a painful absence, but as a comforting warmth. She was there, in the laughter of their children, in the glow of the tree, and in the quiet strength of their family. And he knew, without a doubt, that they would be okay. Because love, true, unwavering love, was the greatest gift of all. That night, the Harper family gathered in the living room one final time before bed. The photo of Amy and Jonah, now resting in a small frame Ethan had pulled from a drawer, sat on the mantel beside the wooden heart ornament. The tree's soft glow illuminated their faces, and for the first time in years, there was a sense of peace in the air. Oliver had curled up on the couch, his eyes heavy with sleep, but his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. Lily sat beside him, her hand gently brushing through his hair, her usual guarded demeanor replaced with something softer. Ethan stood by the fireplace, gazing at the photo with a mix of sadness and gratitude. "I think she's proud of us," Lily said quietly, breaking the silence. Ethan turned to her, his expression tender. "I think so too." Oliver stirred, blinking up at his father. "Do you think Jonah will be okay?" Ethan knelt beside him, smoothing the boy's hair. "I do. He's a strong man, and I think he's found his own kind of peace, just like we're finding ours." "But what if we never see him again?" Oliver's voice trembled slightly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Sometimes people come into our lives when we need them most, and then they have to move on. But that doesn't mean they're gone. We carry them with us, in the lessons they teach us and the memories we make." Lily looked up, her eyes meeting her father's. "Like Mom." "Exactly like Mom," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. As the hours ticked by and the snow began to fall again, the Harpers made their way to bed, each of them carrying a renewed sense of connection. But Ethan lingered in the living room, drawn to the photo and the ornament. He picked up the wooden heart, running his fingers over the carved initials, J and M. Jonah, and Amy. He closed his eyes, memories of Amy washing over him. Her laughter, her kindness, the way she could light up a room just by walking into it. He whispered softly, as though she might somehow hear him. "Thank you for sending him. For reminding me what really matters." The fire crackled in response, its warmth enveloping him like an embrace. For the first time, he felt like she was there, not as a ghost, but as a presence, watching over them, guiding them, loving them. The next morning, Christmas Day dawned bright and clear. The Harpers awoke to find a surprise waiting on their doorstep. A simple package wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. Ethan brought it inside, and they opened it together around the tree. Inside was a note, written in Jonah's careful handwriting. To the Harpers, Christmas is about more than decorations or gifts. It's about the love we share, the memories we hold, and the courage to move forward. Amy taught me that, and I see now that she taught it to you too. This gift is a reminder of her light, and the light that lives in each of you. Carry it with you always. Merry Christmas. Beneath the note was another ornament, this one a delicate wooden star, intricately carved with care. Ethan held it up, the light catching on its edges, and for a moment, he felt as though Amy's hands had guided Jonah's in making it. "It's beautiful," Lily whispered. Oliver beamed. "It's perfect." They placed the star on the very top of the tree, where it seemed to radiate a brilliance that filled the entire room. As they stood together, gazing at the completed tree, Ethan wrapped an arm around each of his children. "We've been through a lot," he said, his voice steady, "but we're still standing. And as long as we have each other, we'll always be okay." Lily leaned her head against his shoulder, and Oliver clung to his side. In that moment, the Harper family wasn't perfect. They still had wounds to heal, conversations to have, and memories to create. But they were whole, together. And somewhere, perhaps on a snowy park bench, or walking down another lonely street, Jonah smiled, knowing his work was done. He carried Amy's memory with him as he continued his journey, comforted by the knowledge that her light would never fade. It had simply found a new home.